Hello everyone, it's Thumper, the Rabid Rabbit. Welcome to Chapter 2 of my 2021 Rust Electricity Guide. In Chapter 2, we're covering the power storage, or batteries. These are rechargeable batteries. You'll see in the menu that you have 3 of them, a small, medium, and large. Small is a Tier 1, medium and large are Tier 2. They do have a slightly different cost for building. And the only one you can buy is the medium, which is available at the Bandit Camp. So if you want to get a battery early, you can go over to the Bandit Camp and buy one. Since the build materials can change, you can always check the menu and see what the cost is today, but this is what they are right now. The most notable thing to take away from the inventory menu is the maximum charging efficiency of 80%, which we will get back to in just a little bit. Functionally, the rechargeable batteries all operate the same way. Their only difference is their output and their capacity. Small is a maximum output of 10 rust watts, medium is 50, large is 100. So choose a battery that fits the size of the circuit you're trying to use. Obviously, you have a circuit that uses, say, 70 rust watts. The medium battery just isn't going to cut it. You're going to want a large. Or, of course, you could use 2 mediums. So mix and match as you have materials and resources available. The other advantage of the larger sized batteries is their runtime. If you look at a small battery, you can see it comes with a free 20 rust watt minutes, but it has a maximum of 150. So if you run it at its full output of 10 rust watts, 150 divided by 10 is 15 minutes. So at its max output, this battery will only run for 15 minutes. As opposed to the medium rechargeable battery, which at its maximum output of 50, 9,000 divided by 50 is actually 180 minutes or 3 hours. So it has a pretty good run time if you charge this up fully and you're running it at maximum load. The large battery, by contrast, has a maximum output of 100. If you divide 24,000 rust watt minutes by 100, you get only 240 minutes or a 2-hour runtime at full load. But remember, they do only use their active usage output in the calculation of their runtime. So if this is running at 50, if you're only pulling 50 rust watts out of this battery, that doubles the runtime. So this would go from a 2-hour battery to a 4-hour battery. So there's still an advantage to using, say, a large battery instead of a medium on a load of 50 rust watts. You'd get twice the runtime. So if runtime is valuable to you, there you go. Your need for battery runtime will vary with your application, but if you're just a basic user on a standard server and you want to run some lights overnight, remember that daytime's 45 minutes on vanilla and nighttime is 15 minutes. So don't go too far out of your way on runtime if you're just running lights. If you're running turrets and you need to survive hours-long raids, then big batteries are going to make a difference. All right, before we get away from the basics here, let me place these. Small battery, looks like a car battery. Medium battery, you'll notice by default, you'll want to rotate it if you want the connections towards you. Just like the windmill, the connections are actually to my left here. So if I go rotate once, it's away, twice to my right, 3 times, boom, it's in front of me. Same thing with the large. The connection panel is to my left. Rotate once is away, to my right, and then despite the fact it doesn't look like it's in front of me, when you place it, you will see that it is in fact in front of you. So that's something to remember. Okay, moving on. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one other thing I wanted to mention. Batteries can be picked up, and they don't lose their charge when you pick them up. They do lose some health, as you can see, but they do not lose their charge. So that's valuable in the world of cave bases because you can charge batteries on the surface now and then bring them down into a cave. You don't need to have a generator or another power source down there to have power, which used to be the case. If you've been playing for a while, you know that rechargeable batteries didn't used to keep their charge when you picked them up, and that was super annoying. So it's awesome that that's not a thing anymore. Okay, let's move on to some other basics. First of all, batteries discharge as soon as you hook them up to something. So if I take the power output and I connect it to a turret, This turret's going to pull 10 rust watts. You'll see it says active usage, 10. And then above that, the calculated runtime. This only has 440 rust watt minutes in it right now. And at a load of 10, it'll run for 44 minutes. Batteries will always discharge when they're connected to an active electronic component. There are some exceptions, and so I will point them out right now. The exceptions are the switch, the smart switch, if they are in their off position. If you turn them on, they will draw power. If they're off, they will not draw any power. So you can safely connect a battery to a switch and then have another load downstream here. And even though you see the light on here, you'll see if I turn this switch off, active usage is 0. Now I turn it on, light turns green. It's using the 1 rust watt by default, like most components. So as long as these are off, sorry, I had them on before, they don't draw any power. Another exception is the blocker. The blocker will pull its 1 default rust watt. You can see here it's pulling 1. But that's because the blocker is on right now, or it's in the unblocked state. Now, if I take a power source, I'm just going to use this solar panel. As soon as I put power onto the block pass-through handle, this is now blocking power. We'll get to the blocker in the components chapter later. But when this is in the blocked state, like it is right now, you'll see it draws no power, and nothing downstream will get any power either. So it's very much like a switch. It's good for automation stuff. All right, and the fourth exception, and this is true as of today, of course, kids, things change frequently with Rust, is the RF receiver. You can see the RF receiver, I don't have any signal going to this right now, so it's off, and the active usage is 0. So you can safely hook up an RF receiver. Now I have this transmitter hooked up to the same frequency. As soon as I power this up, that activates the RF receiver, and you'll see it is now pulling its 1 rust watt, and of course whatever would be downstream. So these are the 4 components: switch, smart switch, blocker, and RF receiver that you can use without draining your batteries. But that's it. Everything else you hook up to these, root combiner, anything you hook up to these is going to draw power. So just keep that in mind if you're worried about losing your charge. All right. And speaking of charge, let's talk about charging batteries. Now that you know how to use them and how to keep the load off so you don't drain them, now let's talk about charging batteries up. I left these connected when I set them up. That was dumb. I'm actually going to knock these down and place a couple new ones so they only have their default charge in them. You'll see that I rotated it 1, 2, 3 times to get it facing me again. So these 2 batteries, they come, a large battery comes with the 200 rust watt minutes by default. Each of them are the same. And over here I have 5 test generators for 500 rust watts, and over here I have 4 test generators for a total of 400 rust watts. This is intentional. What I want to demonstrate for you here is the basic principle of charging batteries. Batteries can be charged up to a maximum input of 4 times their output. So in the case of a large battery, maximum output's 100. You can charge them using up to 400 rust watts, 4 times. So for the medium, it's 50 times 4, or 200 for maximum input. And for the small battery, which only has 10 as its maximum output, 40 is its maximum input. You can, as I'm about to show you, connect more than that maximum, but the battery will not use it. Period. So when you're planning your charging for your batteries, you should plan as best you are able to not put more than 4 times their output into the battery, or it's wasted power. You might be better served splitting that excess power into another battery or some other purpose. To demonstrate that, I'm going to hook these both up at as close as I can to the same time here. So let me see how quick I can do this. Just a little off, but close enough. So you're going to see that both of these batteries start charging. Now, remember how we looked in the inventory and it said 80% efficiency? What that means is For every 100 rust watts I put into this battery, 80 will be added to the capacity, or 80%. So if I'm putting 400 rust watts in, like I am here, it's going to add 320 rust watts per minute, or you'll see the capacity go up by 320 rust watts every minute. So after 1 minute of charging at 400 rust watt input, this is going to go from the default 200 up to 520 rust watt minutes. And guess what? So is this one, because all that power over 400 is not going to get used. And that's what I'm going to prove to you right here. You're going to see that these both hit the same point in almost the same time. There's 520, there's 520, right? If this were charging at 500 times 80% or at 80%, this would be putting in 400 per minute, and it'd be well ahead of this battery, which it is not. They're charging at effectively the same speed, just slightly different because I had a delay hooking them up. So again, you can put in up to 4 times the maximum output, or 400 for large, 200 for medium, and 40 for small. Anything over that is a waste, so don't bother. All right, it's hard to plan that sometimes because, like with windmills and so forth, you can't really judge the output very well, but some power sources you can. So just keep that in mind. Okay, there's the basics, right? The batteries behave the same, different sizes. If you hook them up, they discharge initially, unless you use one of these 4 devices that can stop power. And to charge them, you hook up, as much as you can, as much as you have available, but anything over 4 times their output is a waste, and you do only get 80% efficiency. So you're going to lose 20% of that input regardless. All right. Incidentally, if you're not good at math, that means if you have this battery running at 100, its maximum output, you have to be putting in at least 125 or it will die eventually. If you're putting in more than 125, it'll actually charge while you're running it at full load. But anything under 125, it's going to die eventually. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Now, this is where things start getting interesting. So grab a drink and let me start explaining some of the other fun topics with batteries. If all you need is basics, there's basics. Get on with your life. First thing that a lot of people ask me about are root combining batteries. This is running batteries in parallel, taking 2 batteries and putting them into a root combiner. Yes, you can absolutely do this. It is allowed. The only reason you would do this is because you have a circuit that needs more than 100 rust watts. You want that circuit to be running through a battery so that it's battery backed up, as it were. And so you combine 2, say, large batteries into a root combiner so that you can get an output of 200. That will work. Now, the root combiner is one of several quirky components, which I'll get into a little bit more later. That's what the demonstration on the wall is. But the root combiner does not consume any rust watts from the circuit. So when you hook up these 2 batteries to this root combiner, the output will be 200, not 199. It doesn't consume a rust watt from the circuit for itself. However, it does consume a rust watt from the battery. Both batteries. And this is where running batteries in parallel through a root combiner gets quirky. Watch this. I'll hook them both up to the root combiner, just the root combiner, and you will see we now have an output of 200 instead of 100, but each of these has an active load of 1. So it's burning 1 rust watt from both batteries at the same time. It's double dipping. Ain't that some shit? All right, now I connect this to this light where it's burning 10, and now you've got 11. It doesn't take the load of 11 or even 10 and split it between the 2. No. It's not 5 and 5 or 6 and 6 or 5.5 and 5.5. Not in Rust, kids. In Rust, screw you. I'm taking 11 from both batteries. Even though you have a maximum circuit capacity of 200, so you can run a whole lot more, and we will in a moment, the load on the battery actually double dips from both batteries. That sucks. So you're not losing 5 or 6 from each per minute, you're losing 11 each per minute. Yeah, not an efficient way to use power, because that means you then have to put in a charge rate on both batteries to make up for this single load. It double dips on the load, which means you have to double account for the charging. That sucks. This is why I generally will suggest to just make 2 circuits of 100 each and just run each circuit off its own battery. You shouldn't have a whole lot of cases where it's really necessary to have a circuit over 100. It's perfectly legit to do this, it's just a pain in the ass and really inefficient. Where it becomes a bit more efficient, arguably, is when you're actually running these at their full load. Because here's the fun part. Okay, so this whole circuit with all these turrets connected, I'm about to plug this in, is actually a load of 192. So watch this. I'm gonna plug that in, and you're gonna see that now both of these are running at 100. That 192 isn't like 96 per battery. No. Once you get up to a load over 100, it still double dips. So both batteries, as soon as you get to 100, both batteries will be at a load of 100. If you get up to 150, they're both at a load of 100. You get up to 192, as you can see, like that 200 is down to 33 minus 25, that's 8 left, so 192, so follow the math. This is a circuit of 192. What it looks like, it works because there's 200, but what it looks like to the batteries is a double dipped full load of 100, which means they're both discharging at their maximum rate. Bummer. It's not as terribly efficient as before, because technically if this were evenly split, it would be 96-ish on each battery, so you'd only be losing, 4 rust watts of efficiency per battery in this scenario. So the closer you get to the maximum load, the more efficient this double dipping scenario becomes. For that reason, I will caution you, if your load is close to 200, combine 2 batteries if you have to. If your load is close to 300, combine 3 batteries, not 4 or 5. Don't put more batteries on than what you absolutely need, because the lower percentage of this combined circuit that you're using, the less efficient it becomes. I know that's complicated and it's hard just to hear me explain it, and that's just fucking life. So my advice, just try to avoid this scenario. It kind of just sucks. You're better off just going with circuits of 100. Just do that. Now, that's batteries in parallel for the purpose of getting a larger total output. A lot of folks want longer run time out of their batteries. You want your load to run longer on a battery backup. So I've set up a couple scenarios here to try and explain what happens when you run batteries in series. That's one connected to another, connected to another. Now, intuitively, you might look at this scenario and say, okay, the turret uses 10, the battery can put out 10. If I plug this in and this were fully charged, it would run for 15 minutes. So certainly a second battery means that it'll run for 30 minutes, and a third battery means that it'll run for 45 minutes. Well, not so fast. This doesn't actually work that cleanly, because what happens is as soon as you plug this in, you're burning 10 watts out, but this battery will also put 10 watts out into this battery, where it only achieves 80% efficiency. So only 8 per minute is going into this battery. What that does is it effectively slows down the discharge rate of this battery. So it's not going to discharge in 15 minutes. It's going to discharge 20% slower, because you're putting in 80% again of its load back into the battery, right? So it does get you an extended runtime. The downside is the same thing happens here and it cascades, right? So here you're putting 8 of these into this battery because of its charging efficiency. 10 out, 8 in. That slows down the discharge of this, but it's still putting 10 out to here, where this is only receiving 8. Eventually, this will start getting lower and lower and lower, granted, at a 20% loss. So it will slow down how fast it discharges, but when it gets there, this battery will actually hit 0, and it won't be receiving 10%, 10 rust watt minutes from this battery, only 8. So this turret will turn off, and then you'll get a couple more watts in, and it'll get up to 10, and it'll turn back on, and then it'll turn off. And then it has to wait a few more seconds to get 2 more rust watts, then it gets to 10, turns on, turns off again. I know that's confusing. Trust me, try it yourself. Small batteries are cheap. It's just what's gonna happen. In fact, I'll just leave this running so you can see it get freaky here in a few minutes. The way you would get around that, now I know I just told you don't do batteries in parallel, but that's how you solve this problem. If you want to prevent this battery from going dead while connected to a turret under its full load, you have to put more than 12 rust watts into this thing, because you need 20% more than its output rate because of its 80% efficiency. So if you're putting in 12.5 or basically 13 rust watts, that'll keep this battery charged. If you put in more than 13 rust watts, it'll actually increase its capacity and runtime. You can do that. I hate saying it, kids, but you can do that by just taking 2 small batteries into a root combiner, and now you have 20. Well, 20 is more than 13, so now this battery is going to charge faster than it's discharging. But in order to keep these batteries from now discharging faster than they charge, each of these needs 13 or more rust watts coming in. Well, then you just put another pair of small batteries on here. Yeah, you see how this is going? This is ridiculous. You could do this all day until you have hundreds of small batteries chained up. Eventually, you need a power source charging these damn things. So this is how you would technically get your 15, 30, 45 minute runtime without any gaps and without the turret turning on and off and on and off as you lose that 80% efficiency. It is still double dipping, so you don't actually gain any runtime by having 2 batteries here. It just prevents this one from discharging momentarily and then having to recharge, and thus causing the turret to turn on and off. So this scenario actually achieves the 45-minute runtime that this one can't do without interruptions to power. But it's dumb. It also means that to charge these 4 batteries, you now need 13, 26, 39, 52 rust watts to charge all of these. You know it would be a whole lot more efficient here? Just get a medium battery or a large battery that won't have that problem, and just put your power source directly into the medium or large battery. That's a better way to do this. But I recognize those are expensive, they can be hard to find, they can be hard to get, they can be hard to craft because you don't have a lot of materials or tech trash or whatever. Pro tip, just go buy some solar panels and recycle them for the tech trash. There's reasons, I get it, fine. You do what you gotta do. But if you actually need this scenario right here to work without interruption, you actually have to build it like this, which just sucks. So try to find a better way. Try to find a medium or large battery. One way you can get around this, ironically, although I have no idea why the hell you do this. Oh, see, there goes the turret. Turret just turned off. I have no idea why you would do it this way, but since this battery is going to put out 10, and you need 13 or more to charge it, you could connect it to a medium battery. But if you have a medium battery, why the hell are you doing this? I'm just saying. I'm not saying there isn't a legitimate case for that. There are. I know some people will put a small battery with every turret as like an emergency backup and then feed every small battery from a medium or a large battery on the circuit for the main power. That'll work. Just make sure you're accounting for 13 rust watts per battery to provide the 10 continuous rust watts to the turret, right? Which means you could run 3 of these small batteries off of 1 medium battery without having to do any root combining. You can also get around the next stage of that, because this guy's going to need 63 rust watts to stay charged. Well, hook it up to a large battery. That puts out 100. These are just complicated scenarios, kids. Just try to be smarter. There are better ways, depending on what kind of circuit you're trying to build, to accomplish this. All right? I'm just showing this demonstration to try and give you a sense for what happens when you have an 80% charging efficiency. An 80% charging efficiency means you lose power every time you connect one battery to another, so it's not just as simple as chaining batteries together. Sometimes, depending on your application, it is more complicated than that. So it does require doing some math. You can make these things work out. It's not impossible. I'm not saying you can't do it or shouldn't do it. I'm just saying try not to do this scenario. That's, yeah, just, I mean, I guess it looks cool, but I mean, if you really want to play with shit, like go to the Walmart and hook all these together and watch the, no, don't do that. Yeah, don't do that. Okay. All right. We talked about the basics. We talked about charging. We talked about parallel batteries and a root combiner. We talked about series batteries and then using parallel batteries to charge. That's, I really should leave it there because I'm already at 25 minutes, but I did mention that the root combiner was a quirky component, how it consumes things. I want to mention a couple others that you may run into, and we'll get into these components more in future chapters when we're talking about components and logic. This is a memory cell. This is a branch. You're going to use a lot of branches. You'll probably use memory cells, but probably not so much. These are good examples of quirky behavior when it comes to batteries, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. They have opposite quirky behavior, by the way. The memory cells, I'm going to hook up this string of memory cells. Memory cells do not consume a rust watt from the circuit, much like I was saying with the root combiner earlier. So you can see this memory cell passes the power from the battery through, and there's still 100. Like most components, it does not, or unlike most components, it doesn't consume 1 rust watt from the circuit for itself. Otherwise, this would be 99, and this would be 97, and this would be 95. It would go down by 2. This would use a watt, this would use a watt, then this would use a watt, and this would use a watt, and so on and so forth, right? It doesn't. The memory cell, for whatever reason, doesn't consume a rust watt from the circuit for itself. Actually makes it an ideal component if you need to make your cable connections longer. Just throw down a memory cell and keep going, and you can make a longer cable connection because they don't consume any rust watts from the circuit. I'm trying to be very intentional about using those words. Why? Because on this circuit, you can see you consume 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a light for 6. These 5 do not consume any power from the circuit, but they do count against the battery. That's why they're quirky. So all 11 components here consume 11 rust watts from the battery. Even though they're not consuming rust watts from the circuit, these 5 memory cells are consuming rust watts from the battery. Why? Because you're playing Rust. And that's how shit works, okay? Things are buggy and stupid, all right? So, let me show you the opposite effect. The electrical branch. When I hook up the electrical branch, you'd say, hey, you know, this thing has a configured output. The way the branch works is it has a configured output on every electrical branch that it breaks out. So this is using 2 watts. You could have stuff hooked up to this or not. It's always on. Whenever you have a branch, it always uses this. So this is 2 watts, 4 watts, 6 watts, 8 watts, 10, 11, 12, right? And there you go. There's the 12 rust watts that are being consumed. But if you look closely here, is it really using 12? That number 85 tells me that this electrical branch is consuming 1 rust watt from the circuit for itself. So 1 plus its 2 output is 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15. 100 minus 15, the 100's coming from the battery. 100 minus 15 is 85. This uses 1, and the light uses 1, right? So it should be 16 and 17. So this circuit at the end of this here is actually consuming 17 rust watts from the circuit, but it's only consuming 12 from the battery. So unlike the memory cell, which doesn't consume from the circuit, but does count against the battery, the electrical branch is the opposite. It does consume a rust watt for itself from the circuit, but its consumption does not count against the usage on the battery. There's your lesson in quirky Rust components. I realize that's pretty advanced, but you need to know these things, because as you're planning to build out a circuit and you're thinking, geez, am I going to have enough power on my battery to run stuff? Well, you don't have to count the electrical branch against the battery. But if you're saying, hey, I've got a circuit with 100 rust watts coming out, am I going to have enough rust watts on my circuit to run my circuit? Well, these electrical branches effectively use 3 by default and more if you change their output to higher. But memory cells, nope. You got to account for them on the battery load, but you don't have to account for them on the circuit. Weird. Right. Okay. Wow, gone way over my planned time on this one, so if you're still with me, congratulations. If your head hasn't exploded, double congratulations. But here's what we covered. Basics, 3 types of batteries. They behave the same, but they have different capacities. As soon as you hook them up, they start discharging unless you use one of these 4 components in their blocked or off mode to keep the battery from discharging. When it comes to charging batteries, you can charge it up to an input of 4 times the output, and they charge with 80% efficiency, so you lose 20% of your input when you're charging the battery. You can root combine batteries in parallel, but the power double dips on the battery load, so remember that. You can hook up batteries in series, but use caution when you hook them up in series because they still lose 80% every time you connect one battery to the next. And of course, ways around that are using larger size batteries upstream, larger power sources upstream, or root combining batteries to create a larger power source upstream. All things I would generally recommend against. There's usually a better way to manage your power. And finally, quirky components. What more can I say? Good luck, and don't suck.